What if you could build an app without writing any code at all? It's not science fiction. Today I'm breaking down the best no-code and low-code tools for 2025. Hi, I'm Patrick Metzger. Here at Processing Product, I teach product management. I talk a lot about tech in general, and I know there are a lot of makers out there who just like to build stuff. And so I figured there might be an appetite for no-code platforms and people who want to make things who don't necessarily write in JavaScript or Python or HTML or CSS, but still want to build web applications and mobile applications. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll start with what is no code and why would you build with it? And then we'll go through 4 of the best platforms to use to get started making apps without writing any code at all. So Bubble, Glide, Softr, and Flutterflow are the top 4 that I've picked, and I'll explain why each one has their benefits and some drawbacks. Then we'll talk about honorable mentions. So these are platforms that you could use, but that didn't make it into those top platforms that I would recommend. And then your no-code stack. So that's what are all of the other tools that you need in order to run a business as a solopreneur or entrepreneur who wants to build a no-code app, right? So you probably don't just want an app out there floating in the void. You might want to do some marketing, some social media, emails, and some automation. Maybe there are purchases that happen within your app, and so you need a payments platform. So I'm going to talk about all of those details kind of in rapid fire succession, because the main focus is on the no-code platforms themselves, but it's good to think about what else is in your toolbox in sort of the ecosystem that you're building around your app. So what is no-code? Let's talk about it. Basically, you're going to be able to create a fully functional web application or mobile app without knowing how to code at all. You don't need to be a programmer, software engineer, what have you. You can make something fully functional. It's not just a website, it's a full web application that's going to link to other tools and databases that let you do more than just a blog or a portfolio website might let you do. So code sits at the foundation of all software, right? The screen you're looking at right now is displaying visual images and colors and pixels and apps and menus, all of which are run by code happening in the background. But you don't necessarily have to think about that as a user. And so as somebody building technology who doesn't maybe write code, you may not be thinking about the code either. And that's okay in certain ways, because if you zoom out far enough, you can have an individual component that functions perfectly well without you knowing what the code is, right? So it might be, let's say, a button, right? Or it might be a video player on a website. And that can function as its own little chunk of code that you don't need to know everything about in order to place it on the page. You really just need to know where the video is. And then you want an engine that can kind of do the rest for you without you needing to decide a lot of details and try and make it responsive and work on different platforms. And so then that component, that little chunk of code, can function on its own almost independently. And then if you have enough of these pieces, you can fit them together into a full web application. Now, that's sort of an oversimplification. There's a lot happening in the background that lets it feel like a smooth experience. But the basic idea is you're dragging and dropping components onto a page. You're grabbing a grid and placing it on the page, and then you're deciding what people see once they click on something on the grid. But you're not having to write all of the CSS that decides how many items are in each row on the grid and how that works without breaking and spilling off the screen, right? You can just drag, drop it, and it works. This, what I'm showing right now, is from Glide, but this is the basic idea behind all of the no-code tools that we'll talk about today. So that's kind of what no-code is, and then why no-code? Why would you use this? So there are lots of reasons. I mean, it's very easy and it's fun to play with, and you might create something that you can share with your friends, but if you're trying to create a business out of it, you're a solopreneur, you're an entrepreneur, you're a startup, It's very cost effective, right? So you don't need to hire a developer, and as an individual, you don't need to spend hours and hours writing code or learning to write code. You can just jump right in and make something and make it in a short amount of time. That's going to cut out a lot of the costs that would come with hiring an engineer directly. It enables rapid prototyping, so because so many of these components are plug and play, you can start building an app on Sunday, finish the basic framework on Friday, and then start sending it out on the next Monday to people and validate your idea before you invest a ton of time and energy into something very custom and very expensive that may not work, that may not be something that people need or care about. So you can test your ideas and see how you could improve things. And then, later down the line, hire engineers, build something that's potentially more sustainable, more of a performant, fast, and scalable structure. Although some of these no-code platforms really are scalable as well. It might solve a custom business need. So if you're already a larger company, maybe you have a sales team out in the field, they need to explain a bunch of products to people, and having a visual aid would be really helpful, but you need it to connect to your inventory. You don't want to use just one of the things that's already out there that might not perfectly fit your use case. You can create something that matches exactly what you need. That's the example of a sales team, but you can imagine customer service or user support. Maybe there are maintenance repair people who need to know stuff about very custom parts, and they need to be able to order it through some service that doesn't connect to existing platforms. You can really connect a lot of things and make something work for your business with a no-code app. And of course, it's a learning opportunity. We're lifelong learners. We love to make things. And if you're new to coding, you'll start to get a little bit more technical knowledge. If you're new to the business side of things, maybe you are already a coder, using a no-code app lets you kind of zoom out a little bit and get past the minutia and think about, okay, what are all of the other components beyond just the code that I need to be considering if I want to be a CEO of a startup or a founder of something else that I want to take out into the world. So everybody has something to learn from a no-code app builder. So the first platform we're going to talk about is Bubble. All right, so this is what the dashboard looks like. And if you jump into a particular app, you'll see that I have a web page here, and I can click on different elements and edit them, define conditions for how they should work in certain scenarios. I can add some logic about hover states and generally customize the page the way I want to. Now, this is just a very simple home page that you might build in a website builder, but something that might be a little trickier to make is, for instance, a custom Kanban board where you want things to work in a specific kind of way. You want buttons at the top, and you want the layout to look a particular way. All of these elements you can customize. And don't let the aesthetic of this make you feel like it has to look a certain kind of way. This is me choosing particular fonts, right? So in Bubble, you can customize style variables. So I'm the one who decided Ubuntu is the font that I'm going to use and the colors that are going to be used. So if there are any visual things that don't work quite as well as you want them to, don't worry, you can make it look different than this. But clicking on any individual element, you're able to add workflows. And then if you edit that workflow, you'll see that it takes you to this sequence where you can decide what happens under different conditions, right? So if you click different buttons, you can make changes to a database and then reset the inputs and then hide a pop-up that might have displayed or display a pop-up. Or, you could send an email, you could add any number of different events and custom logic elements here that then will let your whole application function in a way that you want it to. That might not be the plugin that comes right out of the box in another CMS platform. This is just one page example. These are other pages. You can kind of get an idea for how you might display things here. Again, These two things are not aligned. This is because of my design skills. It's not about Bubble. But yeah, I mean, I found Bubble to be an incredibly useful platform. It's user-friendly. You can really jump into a lot of logic right away. You know, you click on something, you hit edit workflow, and then you're off to the races, right? You're creating something new and you're deciding basically everything about how you want it to be. One challenge that I ran into is that these workflows actually give you a lot of power. So because the workflow is deciding a lot of the custom logic in the background, you have to really be aware of the technical implications of making certain changes. I'll give you an example. This is a project management platform that I created. You're making changes to a list of tickets. You're creating a new ticket. You're making changes to the project, the attributes of the project itself. You're resetting inputs and you're hiding a pop-up. Now, with this database change, for instance, if you're changing the order of the tickets or some number that decides what order it displays in the list, you could end up with a lot of custom logic that gets you stuck in an infinite loop. And in fact, that did happen to me. I ran into an infinite loop that basically broke the application. And I was on a paid plan, but then I had to cancel that. I spent all of the database actions that I had available through the plan that I was using. So you have to be aware of what the implications of the logic are doing in the background, because it gives you a lot of flexibility, right? It gives you access to essentially write code and make changes to data, but without needing to write the actual code. That said, if you're doing something a little simpler that doesn't require such custom logic and reordering and reinventing the wheel in terms of drag and drop functionality, you're probably going to be just fine with Bubble, and it'll actually give you a lot of capabilities that are incredibly impressive, honestly, for something that's so user-friendly. So I really enjoyed it, ran into some issues, but ultimately I think it's worth playing around with, and you can create some beautiful stuff in a very short amount of time with Bubble. Okay, so then the next platform is Glide. And spoiler alert, but Glide really is my favorite of the platforms in terms of usability. So this same kind of project management platform idea, it just was so straightforward to put together. I like the rounded corners of everything. I like that I've got a drag and drop interface to add new things, new components into the system. I like that there's a certain degree of complexity displayed, but I don't need to worry about a lot of the details in the background. So for instance, a lot of the logic I was using in Bubble through the workflows to update the database, a lot of that kind of just works in Glide. You still have access to the data, right? So you can jump in, you can customize things, but instead of complex workflows, a lot of the complexity is handled through the logic of the database itself. So you're computing different logical structures through the way that you're setting up the data. So something like an email template, for instance. If you want to reference a particular user, you just add these asterisks, and then you're creating a template. You have the ability to select which data point you want to place into the template, and then you're writing the copy, right? So you're using the database itself to compute the logic for what gets sent in an email or what people see in the user interface. For whatever reason, this made sense to me, and it really worked for my use case, and it was interesting to put together. Also, I love it because as soon as you're in the platform, as soon as you're adding the first elements, they look good on the page. So you don't have to be a designer. You don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about the visuals. If you are a designer, it might be a little limiting for you. But if you're not a designer, you're going to get components right out of the box that just work and look great and align nicely. You can customize things. You can decide certain aspects of the styles to use. You can decide how to emphasize things, how to align things. And if you're on certain plans, you can add custom CSS and really style things the way that you want. But even without that customization, it's going to look good and you're going to be able to create something very quickly, which is the whole goal with a no-code platform. And then not all of the logic is determined in the database, right? So this is referencing the button on the page, and there is an action on that button, and then I can decide what I want that to do. I can change certain workflows, and of course I can hit Command Z and undo things that I don't actually want to ripple out to the platform. But yeah, there are a lot of really great aspects of Glide, and I highly recommend it to anybody who wants to build something quickly. One thing to be aware of right off the bat, the things you build in Glide are all web applications. So they don't do mobile apps. I think they used to at one point. They do progressive web apps, which means if somebody knows what they're doing, they can actually save your web app to their home screen on their mobile device. But when they tap that, it's still just opening within a browser on their phone. It's not a native application that's running on the phone that would work offline, all of those things. Another really important detail that I can show you on my mobile device, right? So here it's a web application. I'm in Chrome. Even if I saved it to my home screen, it would open in my browser of choice. So the thing that I really struggled with is that the drag and drop UI, for the default Kanban board, you can see it's really like basically crashing the page. The Kanban board in particular, it just doesn't work on a mobile device. So even though it's a progressive web application, and even though they really kind of should be thinking about some of these details about how things work on a mobile device, some things work better on mobile than others. So again, if I'm trying to rearrange things, it almost works, but then it just is like pretty clunky at the end of the day. So yeah, this was a deal breaker for me. I actually created a lot of the details of an application, and then I got to that point where I was trying to make the Kanban board work, and it just is not going to work on mobile, and that's kind of essential for me. All in all, though, Glide really is, as I said, what I imagine a no-code builder should be. In terms of the user experience, the ease of adding certain things, changing elements on the page, it just works, and it works really beautifully. It just has certain limitations that were hard for me. And yeah, but it's going to be right for a lot of people, and I think it works really well for what it's doing. All right. So the third platform we're going to talk about is Softr. And you're going to start noticing themes here, right? Drag and drop interface, easily add things into the UI. Softr is less data heavy, I would say. There's not a database directly within the system. You connect it with Airtable, which is a beautiful platform for creating relational databases. And yeah, it's just wonderful UI, really visually gorgeous, and you can view things in a grid, or you could view them in a calendar or a Kanban layout. So you can use it as a project management tool. Anyway, Airtable is useful, and that's kind of the data source that you use for Softr. I think you can use other data sources, but that's kind of the recommended one that they put out there. So yeah, it's really easy to add a block. You can quickly add things in. As you can see, it kind of comes pre-composed with a lot of stuff functioning right away, and it's kind of grabbing from a particular source, you can sort of see how you can quickly and easily switch between things and decide where data goes. So it's just relatively straightforward. It's user-friendly. To me, it felt like it wasn't as easy to get going and have it do all of the things that I wanted to do with a web or mobile application. But, it has things like a Kanban right out of the box, and of course other elements if you want to add them. We were looking at some of them, but it has payment systems, so you can connect to Stripe really easily. You can create an inbox, so you basically have a mail application ready to go. So lots of things that are ready out of the gate. It works pretty nice on mobile. This, again, you're making progressive web applications. So you're not going to be making a native mobile app. So you can't just upload what you create to the App Store for iPhone or for Android. So that is a limitation of both Softr and Glide, and was one of the reasons that I chose not to go with Softr. But ultimately, nice platform, simple customization, very straightforward. I would say fewer options than some of the other platforms. Definitely less customization than Bubble, even a little less than Glide. But again, if you're trying to create some sort of custom business solution, maybe you already use Airtable and you just want to put an app on top of it, Softr is really great for that. All right, so the next platform we're going to talk about is Flutterflow. And I'm going to say it, I think this is the right platform for me. You can create real native mobile applications, not just web apps. You can make them work on the web and as an iPhone app and as an Android app. So that's really cool. It has that same sort of drag and drop. To me, it felt like with Softr, I hit a wall pretty quickly. With Glide, I was making it work until very, very specific use cases, but I did end up hitting a wall. With Bubble, I hit the wall of overly complex logic in order to try and achieve something that I felt was pretty straightforward, which is reordering items in a list. With Flutterflow, I really didn't hit a wall. I would run into challenges, and then I would go to the community, I would ask questions, I would look up YouTube videos, and I could figure out my way around. Now, there is more complexity here than in some of the other platforms. So you're able to change a lot of the properties of values. When you're looking over on the right, you'll notice there's padding and alignment, and you can really set very custom stuff that if you're just trying to make something functional, it might not be necessary. And looking at this giant list of numbers and settings and styles and details might be a little overwhelming for you. But I would say just ignore that to start and just kind of go with what comes out of the box. And then as you need to customize, you'll start to be like, oh, well, I kind of want to make the width of this different. You'll say, oh, I want this a little bit lower beneath the app bar. And so you'll tinker around, you'll find your way through the interface and notice that this is padding and it relates to the left and the right and the bottom and the top, and that you could change this to 80 or 120 or 600, and then it would be further from the app bar. So yeah, you can change a lot of the details of the styles, and that's true also for the actions. So if you have a button or another interactive element on the page, then you will have kind of this separate tab for actions, and then it could be as simple as navigating to a page. And so you would just select the navigate to option and say the sign up, which is another one of the pages. It might be more complex. So in the case of sign up, right, you're not just navigating to a page, you want to save the data that somebody entered onto this page. So on the sign up button, the actions are going to have other details. So it's going to have an auth action that's create account. You'll choose the provider. You could change details, and then you would be able to create more custom logic. If you've got a create project, I didn't finish styling this page, but if you've got a create project button, then you will need to add an action. Maybe you want to show the create project page, right? So then I would just go to the create project button, navigate to create project. And then with Flutterflow, with Glide, it's actually, you're kind of making it interactive as you go. So you're working with an interactive page, and then you select the elements on the left to change details about them. So you can't actually click to select something because it's actually working on the page, but that's nice because you have a preview right off the bat. In Bubble, you have a preview button. In Softr, you have a preview button and a publish button. In Flutterflow, you're actually basically deploying to a preview instance. And so it's much more like a real application. You can see there's references to branches and environments. So those are coding concepts and DevOps structures that are actually how real applications are written and launched, is that you deploy them. You don't just preview something, you would test it out in a staging environment, because then you want the data to work, you want a lot of the other things to set up properly. Glide and some of these other ones are abstracting that process, which that's nice to not have to worry about it and think about it. And in some ways, I think Flutterflow should have an option where you don't have to think about it. But they specifically advertise themselves as low code. They're not a no code platform. And in fact, one of the things that you can do is view the code, you can download the code. And for instance, if you wrote a custom code here, they don't own it. You could decide to leave Flutterflow. You could decide to use a different platform or hire a developer, and they could work on the application that you built in Flutterflow. The other thing to note about Flutterflow is that, similar to Softr, where there's not kind of a database out of the box, you need to connect it to Airtable or a different data source. With Flutterflow, you do that with Firebase. So they have a pretty straightforward onboarding setup when you're first creating an app. It's a little cumbersome to figure out how Firebase works, and that's like a Google product that's a little more technical. You're really setting up a database, and so that creates a little bit of a barrier to entry. But once you figure it out and once it's there, it all kind of just works, and you can create new collections. You can manage all the data from within Flutterflow once the connection is made. So after that point, you don't really have to worry about Firebase so much, but there's a little bit of setup involved with that. In terms of themes and aesthetics, like, you have a lot more nuance and detail, both at the theme level and at the individual level, to change the styles of things. You're actually getting notifications of bugs as you go. So, I didn't specify a password with the auth flow. I didn't link this field to the action that this button is trying to take. And so it's like, I don't know where the password is. And so I have to tell it this is the field with the password. But what's nice is that instead of kind of hunting around in code or trying to figure out where something is, or like not knowing that it's going to be broken, in the case of something like Bubble, I hit preview and then the app breaks, as opposed to catching the bug before I break things. So in this case, I can just click that auth action and it brings me right to the place I need to be. And I say, oh, I didn't select the email field or the password field. So I'll say from variable, and then I'll select one of the widgets on the page, the state of the widget on the page. And of course, I didn't name these very well. I think that this is the text field. We can go look. Here, I'll update this right now so that it's better. So this is first name, last name, email. Okay, so now, I could go back to that bug, but I know that the issue is with this action. So I can also just go straight to that button and edit the action there and say the widget state of email matches with email, and the from variable, the widget state of password is the password. So yeah, you're kind of deeper into the weeds with Flutterflow, but because it's not abstracting away some of the complexity, it actually lets you move past some of the barriers that you run into with other platforms. And it's really the platform to use, I would say, if you're trying to create a no-code mobile app. So if you want to make a web app, Glide is honestly amazing. You should just go with Glide. But if you want something that you could publish to the App Store that people can download onto their phones, Flutterflow is the way to go. Now, all that being said, if you want to actually see your app in the App Store and have people be able to download it, you'll go to this mobile deployment piece. You'll need to upgrade. You could try and figure out how to do that by downloading the code and using Xcode to get it into test flight, and then submit it to be published in the iOS App Store. But that's a lot to do. If the whole point is to try and use as little code as possible, there's a lot of code involved with all of those different steps. So they have a way to do mobile deployment. You have to upgrade in order to make that work. I think it's relatively straightforward, but yeah, mobile apps, they're just are another can of worms. So be prepared to run into some complexity if you are trying to build a true mobile application. So yeah, I'd say probably my top recommendation out of all of these platforms, just because of its flexibility. The barrier to entry is higher, so there's more of a learning curve with Flutterflow. If you're really non-technical, I would go with Glide because it works, it's beautiful, it's easy. Otherwise, Flutterflow is going to get you a lot of flexibility and capability to really launch a proper product that's going to be sustainable. All right, so honorable mentions. We're going to go through these a little bit more rapid fire. There are other platforms out there that are doing no code in different ways. I didn't find them to be the right solution for me, but they exist, and so it's good to know what the strengths and weaknesses of these different platforms are. Starting with Wappler. So this is a platform you actually are downloading. I like their little web UI here. Unrelated to anything about the experience of actually building an app, but this is a fun website trick. With Glide and Flutterflow, you're using the web UI to build things. With Wappler, you're actually downloading an application onto your desktop computer, and then you're building stuff. For me, it was a little more design heavy. As you can see, you're kind of viewing the columns, the grid in the background. You're setting a lot more details, and you're kind of following the element tree in a more nuanced way that I wouldn't necessarily need to see from a no-code builder. But of course, if you're a designer, that's going to be useful for you. The other thing is that there is no free plan. So with some of these other platforms, it really took me like a month to figure out, do I want to go with this platform or this other platform? And so something like a 2-week trial is not going to give me the answer. Not that I'm going to be working on it every day for a month, but if I'm just touching base with the platform as a hobby or an interest separate from my day job, then 2 weeks is really not going to be enough. And so I like that other platforms have a free plan, and them not having a free plan meant I really couldn't explore and figure out whether it was right for me. it seems like they have a lot figured out. If you want this level of detail and to think about classes and naming conventions for buttons and columns and headings, then this could be a useful platform for you. If you're just trying to add a few buttons onto a page to then get to the next thing and actually make it function and not think about rems or things like that, then to me, it's like more detail than necessary on the design side. But it's a useful platform. You can definitely build web applications and mobile apps with it, so Wappler is an option for you. Another platform is Adalo. So they have a pretty straightforward UI, fewer settings in terms of branding styles. You can see I can choose from a specific limited set of fonts unless I want to upgrade the colors. I don't get to add like 16 other nuanced colors. I have 4 colors that I can choose. And yeah, to me, like it wasn't super intuitive. So you're zooming in and out. You have to, use your trackpad or some other way to zoom. And you're never just like, you can't just click and go to that page and look at only that page. You're kind of zooming in and out of every page every time you're interacting with anything. So that was a little confusing. And then the way they do workflows is like, if you want to see the logic that's going on, it's a little bit confusing how to get there. And that's not what I meant to do at all. Oh, and it's stuck and Command C is not working and it's okay. Yes. See? Okay. Yeah. I reordered that in a way that I didn't mean to. Right. So if I want to say what happens when somebody clicks on one of these items, it's really easy to trigger a notification. There aren't a lot of other things I can do. I can navigate to a certain page. I can create an item, update an item. I guess I can ask ChatGPT something. So there are a couple integrations that happen in there, but it just didn't feel like it had the flexibility that I needed. For instance, I don't know how to access this little 3 dots. Presumably clicking on this somewhere on this card would do something, and clicking these 3 dots would do something different. But I just have one click actions for not even a specific thing in this list, but kind of this area in general. So yeah, Adalo, it felt a little limiting to me. When I added things right out of the gate, it didn't look pretty also. And so like, it's not immediately clear how to make this look good. And especially with limited styles, at least on the free version, you can't really make it look that different than it comes out of the box. So these are some of the challenges I ran into with Adalo. So that's Adalo. Thunkable is another platform that looks like this. So to me, it's sort of similar to Glide in a lot of ways, except with just fewer options. There are kind of fewer components that are available to add to any given page. And then once you have a component there, it's not as easy to see how to customize it. I can change the layout. I can change where it's positioned or how big it is, I guess. Yeah, I can add interactivity. And so this is an interesting choice on their part. They're kind of doing what Scratch did starting in the early 2010s, where you can drag certain blocks around and change details about things. But yeah, again, I'm kind of lost in the bad UX. Okay, so I'm adding a block. Set videos play to true. Screen background color. Okay. Yeah, so this to me was just not intuitive. The idea, I think, is to use these like puzzle pieces and fit them in with each other, but yeah, not super intuitive, and It's not how I would choose to view kind of the logical workflows behind a given application. But yeah, you can build a mobile app, right? I think if you want a relatively simple mobile app, you could put it together with Thunkable. The next platform is Webflow. So Webflow is great for creating websites. I feel like you can't do as complex stuff with web applications as you can in some of the other platforms. It is also another one that's pretty design heavy, so you get a lot of flexibility on design and less flexibility on functionality. But if what you're doing is trying to build a website, it's actually a great visual editor for something like a blog or a portfolio site or just kind of landing pages. You do have some logic and you can add integrations, so you can do certain things, but it's just a bit more limiting than some of the other platforms. Visually, you can get really beautiful effects. You can add animations. Like in some ways, it's more for designers or even front-end developers who want to focus on animations and other visual elements rather than the code. But there's not really a very complex data management system. So you would need another platform. I think they recommend Wized, Wized, build apps in Webflow. So this would be the way to make it a proper web application. But for me, it just was much more design heavy than I needed or wanted. And so I didn't pursue it further in terms of trying to make it work as a more complex web application. If you're just trying to create a website that doesn't do too many things with payments and invoicing and sending emails, then you don't need to worry about it. Or if you're just using Shopify or some other web application that's already built out of the box, you can just use Webflow as kind of a landing page to get people into that Shopify experience. But yeah, that's Webflow. Appsheet. So this is actually a Google product. So we can look at an example of what an application looks like. You'll see right out of the box, the way that it comes is basically as a Google app. It's using their, Roboto font, and their aesthetic and their material design layout. And you can do a little bit of changing of that. You get 10 fonts to choose from, and you could change the text size and make it bigger, although it looks like that could get dangerous. So yeah, Appsheet is really not about customizing an app. It's more like if you have a Google Sheet already and you want to put some functionality on top of that for your own particular use case, then you can do that. You can change some aspects of how things are displayed, but you're not even able to like drag elements around. You're really just like, is it a deck or is it a table or is it a gallery? And then within that, it just has a default layout that you get to accept as it is, basically. But yeah, again, if what you're looking for is functionality and you don't care how it looks and you're fine that it looks like Google built it, Google is a very successful company. And so it can be straightforward. It doesn't have to be fancy as long as it's functional. So in those cases, Appsheet could be really good for you. And there's one other detail. Appsheet is actually a great transition because honorable mention number 5 is AI. So I'm listing a few platforms here that make it really easy for you to create code of some kind, potentially a no-code application. So, ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude are the 3 big ones. Pico and Replit are more kind of customized for building apps and coding in particular. Gemini is listed here, and that is actually something you can do directly from Appsheet. So that's one nice thing about it. If I, instead of having a spreadsheet in advance, I wanted to just create something, I can create an app and say, start with Gemini. And then I'm basically using a chatbot to create an app. So the example I've been using throughout this is a simple project management platform. So let's create that right now in real time. And there should be no complex, confusing, unnecessary features. I don't know. Let's see what Gemini does with that. All right, and so then it's proposing a database structure that I can go with or not. I could completely trash this and do something different, but let's see. It has a users table. Yeah, that seems fine to start with. Projects, yep, created, updated. Tickets, ID, title, description, status, to do in progress done. That's about right. Let's just see what it does right out of the gate without changing anything. They're setting up my new app. All right, my app is ready. Try it out here or on the editor. So I can add a ticket. It's a to-do and save. I can select multiple tickets and delete them if I want to. There doesn't seem to be a quick way to drag and drop to reorder. The projects don't seem to relate to the tickets. So, you would need to do some tinkering. I also don't need to see the users list. But yeah, again, this is kind of fun that you could just describe what you want Appsheet to do, and Gemini is going to do a pretty nice job of a very basic app that does that task. And I should have saved that prompt because I'm going to also show you the same thing in Claude. Let's try this out. Yeah, I don't know. Let's try that. So the thing with Claude is that it's writing real code. And this is custom code. It's not just the Appsheet. Like here, Google wrote this 5 years ago. Artifact failed to load. Uh-oh. Try fixing with Claude. So it created an error for itself. We're going to try and fix it. Oh, well, cool. Well, that seemed to work pretty well. Oh my gosh, okay. And I can drag things between columns. Can I? Yeah, and I can reorder the tickets. Yeah, I can only drag below. I can't drag something on top of another thing. Anyway, small details, but yeah, this is basically the idea. Let's see, any part of the implementation more detail? No. So again, it's writing the code, but if my application is simple enough, I can just kind of watch the pretty colors go by and not worry about class names and on drag over and all of the other things that are happening. Yeah, so the leftmost column is kind of out of sight now, but I can click it and that lets me edit the description. And it did, in fact, save the data. I can reorder. Let's see if it can fix that layout. Okay, so it does seem like it made it work on a smaller viewport. It's just deciding to stack the columns, which is not quite right. But yeah, I mean, the basics thing is still working. Now I'm just actually building this. So you're getting to watch in real time as I explore what Claude can do. Something like that? I don't know. Let's see. It used to be for a task like this, I would say, go brew a cup of tea. But this is really, it's happening in basically a minute, I think. We can time it the next time it's compiling. Yeah, okay. Well, it had the dots there. Okay, let's see. Oops, okay. the length limit for this chat? Starting a new conversation. For right now, I'm on the free plan, which means I need to be more efficient with my queries. And yeah, we'll see if it runs into issues. Nice. Rounded corners. Oh, and it's using the hand. Well, okay. It's using the drag hand, but I can't actually click and drag. Okay, so it broke itself. Let's set a timer and see how long it takes. Okay, so yeah, that was less than 30 seconds. Let's see. Oh, and I'm out of free messages until 3 p.m. Okay, so yeah, I would say let's go back to version 2. Is probably the best version that we got here. Yeah, it's really like version 3 except for the style issue. Because I can click them, I can drag them, I can prioritize them, and all 3 columns are visible. It's just that the leftmost column is off screen. But yeah, this works pretty well. So the thing that's cool about Claude, I could download this code and try and figure out how to launch an application like this, but I can also just hit publish and then publish and copy link. The link is copied. If I open in an incognito window, as somebody who doesn't have a Claude account, I have to accept that it's AI generated. But then I can just use this platform. I don't need to have access to Claude. I can update the data. If I save change and say assign to Bob instead of Alice. So this says I can update the data. If I refresh the page, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so then it's really working on the front end, but there's no data stored in the back end. Data. I hit save, makes me think I'm saving the data, but I guess it's just while I'm within this window. So it is saved, but as soon as I hit refresh, it goes back to the original state. So not a perfect solution for all of your no-code needs. This isn't really going to get you to an end product probably, but it is pretty cool. And as long as you're not creating something that needs complex data storage, you actually could make an application and then share it with somebody and it would be ready to go. All right. So what else should be in your no-code stack? This is supplementary tools that are not actually full no-code platforms. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Google Workspace because, well, it's a million different things. You've got project management, email, slides, Google Docs, Google Forms. You can connect a Google form to a Google Sheet. And then, as we were saying, you could use Appsheet to build an app on top of that. So you can really do a lot with Google's free tools. They are owned by Alphabet. They're Google products, and so that's a consideration. But lots of amazing capabilities there. You've got email marketing, right? You can use ConvertKit or MailChimp to help round out your tool set so that you've got an email ecosystem in addition to any app or social presence. You'll probably want some automation. So this is usually built into a no-code platform, but usually you kind of reach a limit. So I've used Zapier, for instance, to connect Stripe to Glide. Glide already has a Stripe integration, and so you can do certain things, but if you want to run a subscription model, for instance, it's a little bit trickier to do that directly within Glide. And so using a Zapier automation allowed me to call the Stripe API and set up what I needed. that would then submit back to the Glide platform, and everything worked coherently. You can do the same thing with IFTTT, Parabola, or Make. Those are kind of the most popular platforms for automation. And you'll probably want to design some stuff. You may want to design the UIs, but you probably can do that directly within a no-code app builder. But at the very least, you're going to be creating images and other sorts of visual representation for within the app and on social media. Canva and Figma are just a couple of ways that you could be doing that. For social media management, Buffer and Hootsuite are a couple examples. There are some free versions of apps, but in terms of the platforms that are most popular and most easily accessible, these are they. They're a little bit pricier, but it's helpful to be able to schedule lots of posts for throughout the week, especially if it's like a side hustle and you're doing it on a Sunday, then you can keep a constant social media presence going without needing to log in, add content, and constantly break up your flow. And then Notion, I mention here, almost similar to Google Workspace because it's essentially its own ecosystem of tools as well. They don't brand each one of them the way that Google does. Google's sort of treating each of them as a separate product. Notion probably is doing that within their own teams, but outwardly it's just one product that you enter in, and best known for collaborative documents and project management. But of course, if you're doing project management, there's also got a calendar involved. It can act as a database. You can build simple websites with it, basically landing pages. Not, I wouldn't use it for your entire website, but some people are doing that. You can use it for forms and workflow automations. So you can really do a lot with Notion, and there are people who built their entire business on top of just Notion without building an app at all. So that's been exciting to see startups take that approach. It's an even more drastic no-code approach in certain ways, but less customizable. You kind of have certain limitations you'll run into, but Notion is an amazing tool that you should be aware of. Payment processing, I already mentioned Stripe, Square is another one, and PayPal are ways that you can accept payment methods without needing to store credit card information, which you should never do in just an open database. Especially platforms like Glide aren't necessarily secure right away, and so you would need to add a lot of layers of abstraction and encryption if you wanted to be able to handle that. And I would suggest you actually just work with a developer at that point and not do a no-code platform. So these are platforms that'll help you manage payments. For client booking, invoicing, and contracting, Honeybook is the one that I've seen become really popular in the last year, especially with agencies or consultants, because it essentially lets you schedule book sessions with clients, invoice them for the sessions, contract with them. So it really can be a one-stop shop for a lot of the business elements of solopreneurship. And Bonsai is a very similar platform. They're kind of direct competitors. Related to that, you've got Harvest and Toggle Track. These are specifically for time tracking, but they do a lot of that same invoicing and billing. So I would say these are apps that you can use if you are working with other consultants, for instance, so that they can log time and then you know how much you need to pay them. Or the reverse, you can say, I'm a consultant, I'm going to use this as a way to track my time, and then submit an invoice to your employer, and then it makes a lot of that process much simpler. Google Analytics is kind of the big analytics platform, but there are some alternatives like Overtracking and Umami, and there are other ones that are more expensive that I didn't list here, like Mixpanel, but I would say that's more at the enterprise level, and I would implement that once you have developers on your team and are doing a little bit more custom coding. For scheduling, Calendly is the big player, but I love You Can Book Me. Very simple, nice UI, good user experience, and cal.com is doing some good stuff as well. And that kind of brings us to the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed learning more about no-code platforms. I hope you found a little bit more insight into where you should start as somebody trying to get into no-code. And yeah, comment below if you have any additional questions or if you have experience with the platforms. I'm really curious to know what you liked, what you didn't like. And yeah, let's keep this conversation going because it's only becoming a more and more powerful space for starting a business and building really cool stuff. So Thanks so much. You know the deal. Like, subscribe, all of the things. And yeah, I'll catch you next time on Processing Product.